Hello, my name is Tim Lahili, and in this video we're exploring the grid's interconnection to other widgets. It's the last video in our grid series. Let me hop into the tool and show you. It's by far the simplest, almost doesn't really even require a video, but just to make sure I cover all my bases, we've got the video. So the point I'm making here is that the grid is fundamentally the driver of almost all the other widgets. Any widget in which you do not need to log into a case specifically is driven by the grid. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I open the process data widget, you'll see that there here in the left is a spot to log into a case. Select your case here. The same is true of the export widget, the job status widget. Those widgets are, for the most part, independent of the grid. But if I were to go into the, let's say, timeline, there is no such spot to log into a case. And you can see it's already populating with stuff from the case we're logged into, and it is specifically populating what is in the grid, at least in this case. In the grid timeline, there's obviously the case line timeline too. That is another point that is worth making. Many of the widgets that are powered by the grid will have two tabs, one that is directly controlled by the grid, as in this one for the timeline, and one that is more of a case overview, as is this one. The other widgets that have things like that would be the chart widget has a case overview and a grid, case charts and grid charts. And I think there are one or two others. I don't need to spend time finding them, but you get the point. So let me show you a few critical things. So let's say I was in the map widget. First, let me make my grid smaller. I'm going to make my grid really small here, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a second. Because I only want to pull in a few pieces of data. And you can see right here, building widgets. It's got the information that I've just pulled it in. It's funneling all that information in that step to the other widgets that are relevant. So let's go ahead and open the map. The map is, of course, powered by the grid, and you can see there's nothing in here. There are no mapped data points, but I happen to know that there is data in this grid that should be mapped. So because I know that, let's go ahead and let's see, what do I do? Right, get location data. And it's going to go try to find there. I got the location data. Now, what did it do? It's important to understand that what it actually did when saying get location data was it applied a grid filter and it refreshed the grid. It in fact was doing the same thing as if you came here and you selected the appropriate grid filter and then did your own refresh. And there are only 10 data points plotted here. Not because there are only 10 pieces of location data, but because I have my grid size set to only 10. If I expand it to 100, all of a sudden you're going to see a whole lot more data points. So you have to be cognizant of how the grid interacts with these other widgets, because if you weren't and you just were using the map widget and you were getting results that were confusing to you, not all the data you expected, you might not know it was because your grid was set improperly. So the last thing I want to show you is that some of the widgets, the grid, the timeline, things like that, have these little play buttons on them. And it will allow you to play through this data chronologically. But I want to show you what it's doing relative to the grid, because again, what it's doing is actually filtering the grid. So if I go ahead and play, you can see it's going to this data point, that data point, but what's really going on is it is applying new filters to the grid each time. And we'll just see it sort of iterate through all the data here as it goes through. And there's no reason to really watch this because we're not exploring the map widget, we're exploring the grid. Now, I'm done let's say I'm not interested in seeing that anymore. I go ahead and close this. Um, but there are still filters applied to the grid, because what the map widget was doing was it was actually acting on the grid, and the grid in turn, after being acted on, was informing the map widget of what the relevant object was. So if I want to get the grid back to sort of normal, I have to come up here and remove the grid filters. You can see there are 2 grid filters applied. And I don't mean these two, I mean 2 types of grid filters. You've got a local one and a global one. If I clear the local one, the stuff the map was doing is gone. If I clear the global one, the location data we had originally searched from will be gone. And there you go. We're back to sort of a clean grid. So that's really what I wanted to explain into the grid's interconnection between the various widgets. Let me actually show you one more thing on the timeline worth seeing. Where is my timeline widget? And then let me open my grid widget again. The reason the widgets are all interconnected like this is so you can do things like this. We've got the timeline up here. We've got a bunch of different groups or whatever. Maybe I want to see, hey, what's this record? This 36. If I click on that, it will immediately populate that 36. And it allows me to, sort of open my viewer and see the 36 and understand what this widget is telling me, because the easiest widget to interact with and sort of see the data and understand your data is the grid. So that's why we pump things through the grid. If I click on this, I'll see what's in that group. It looks like there's nothing actually in that group because we've got a bunch of different filters applied. So let's go ahead and do that and try. There we go. And so on and so forth. Anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to show you. That's how the grid works. Be cognizant of the interconnection between the grid and the other widgets, particularly when using other widgets, or as I said, you might get results you're not expecting. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to post.